Hello and welcome back to my channel where I like to review, recommend, and research books, mostly historical fiction. I'm just a nosy person and I like to look deeper into stories and research behind them and figure out what is true and what is not of the stories. So if you're a nosy person like me, curious, or you just always had a question of why did this happen, definitely subscribe to my channel. Today we're going to talk about two women in history that some people believe are fake and other people believe they were real in history. Now, what is the book that got me going down this rabbit hole? Pope Joan. Now, I picked up this book at a library sale a couple years ago and I read it and it was absolutely fantastic. Now, this book stays pretty true to her legend, which I had no idea about until I read this book. Now, Pope Joan, I'm going to kind of go through the story and you're going to figure out some of the things that are part legend and part of the story that coincide pretty well together. So this is about a little girl named Joan, and this takes place in about the 9th century. Now, this obviously was during the time where women and girls were not really taught anything other than how to run a house. She wanted to learn, she wanted to write, she wanted to be able to read just like her older brothers. Well, one day she finds herself in a monkhood, but she has disguised herself as a young boy. She works her way up, she becomes a very clever scribe, she finds her way to Rome, and then becomes a cardinal, and then becomes the Pope. Now her ending is really, really tragic, which we will go over because there's actually a couple different versions of her ending. Now, like I said, this book sticks pretty true to legend. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was very well written, it is adventurous, it is informative, fast-paced. I absolutely love this. And after reading this book, I was like, man, did she exist? Did she not? A part of me wishes she does. I always like to hope that maybe she was real. Let me tell you what I found out about her and another woman in history that I've always wanted to research as well. So let's talk about Pope Joan. Now, where did this legend start? Why did it start? Well, there's actually a couple different reasons, but the main theory is that a lot of upset monks that were upset at the papal authority had created this rumor because nothing would make them more upset than saying that a woman had once been pope. Now, it's also thought to believe that possibly there was some hidden Protestants at the time that had started spreading this rumor. Now, it is thought to believe that she would have served anywhere from between 855 to 858, and it is believed that she had served about 25 months. However, the problem with that is historical record says there's no way that could happen. Unfortunately, this would actually fall during the reign of two popes, so it would be Leo IV and then Benedictine III, when there was only a couple weeks between each of their reigns. So there's no way that this woman could have served for 25 months between these two popes. Now comes the question, was she written out of history? I don't know. I would not doubt it for sure. Now, in the 13th century, her story was finally put from pen to paper by a French Dominican, Stephen of Bourbon. Now, he dated that Joan reigned in 1100. So obviously, this means that she would have served a little bit later in time. However, his story does run really close to the book. So I'm kind of thinking that the book was mostly based off of his theories, I would assume. But basically that she was a young girl, she had disguised herself as a boy in a monkhood, she had worked her way up the ladder, she was very, very smart, intelligent, clever, and she was a fantastic scribe. And then just like the book says, she becomes cardinal, then she becomes pope. However, it is the ending that is extremely tragic, and that is she actually ends up getting pregnant when she is pope. She finds love, gets pregnant, and then in the middle of a procession, she gives birth right there in the middle of it. And when that happens, obviously, things got a little crazy. A lot of people were very, very, very upset and drug her out and stoned her to death. Yeah, like I said, that's a very, very tragic ending. Also, in the 13th century, there was another person that put her story on paper. It was a Polish Dominican writer by the name of Martin of Trepow. Now, his theory ran really, really close to Bourbon's theory as well, but however, her ending was a little bit different. Still tragic, but a little bit different. She ends up giving birth in the procession, but instead she actually dies from childbirth, and the child dies as well, and she is buried right then and there. Now, the reason why this theory came about was that, after this happened, after, the 9th century, a lot of processions would absolutely avoid this place of the cobblestones due to the disgraceful event that happened there. So that is where the theory came from, that she was actually buried right there on the spot where she perished after childbirth. Now, Martin actually gave her a little bit of a background story as well. So she was an English woman, but was born in a German city called Mainz. Now, he claims the person that she fell in love with was another fellow Benedictine monk when they were on their way to Athens, Greece. Now, up until the 15th century, Joan's story was actually considered the truth, even by the Council of Constance in 1415. Now, the reason why this story had dissipated over the years was just because there really was no historical information that really backed it up other than it was just in stories. There was no evidence of her. Could it be that she was written out of history? Absolutely. Could it be that she was just a rumor to begin with to upset the papal authority? That could also be true as well. I would like to believe, like I said, was that maybe she was real. Maybe. But unfortunately, there's a lot more historical evidence that suggests otherwise. So it's kind of cool to think that, a woman who disguised as a man worked her way up all the way to be the Cardinal Pope. I just think it would be incredibly interesting if a woman did work her way up from the monkhood to be a pope. So do you think she was real? I'd like to believe so. Now, this next lady is probably someone that is a little bit more known about because of the show Vikings. Now, this is a show that really, really stays true to my heart because I actually named my dog after Lagertha Lothbrok. So I could say this is probably one of my favorite shows ever. Now, believe it or not, Lagertha is kind of possibly just a fictional person. She could be based off of several different things, and I was actually kind of shocked to find out that she probably wasn't even a real person. But doesn't mean she still doesn't have a story. So let's talk about Lagertha Lothbrok. I found it very interesting when I was researching Pope Joan and then researching Lagertha that how much of their stories sound very similar, or at least starting out. So Lagertha Lothbrok would have lived in the 9th century. She was also put into a story in the 13th century. She was in a book called The Deeds of the Danish, which is just a book that really tells the whole history of the Danes. Now, just like the TV show, she is the wife of Lagertha Lothbrok. We're actually going to back it up to a Swedish king by the name of Fro and the king of the Norwegians, Sigurd, who is actually Lagertha Lothbrok's grandfather. And unfortunately, King Fro had defeated Sigurd in a battle, and that's where things went south. He had thrown all of Sigurd's family members, especially the women, into brothels in many different places. Now later, when Ragnar actually succeeds his father to the throne, he is not happy about this, and he wants to get revenge for the women of his family. So on the way to Norway, he actually meets a group of women who were battle warriors and were ready to go to war with Ragnar to free all these people. And a lot of these women actually dressed up like men to go into battle. But of course, there was that one woman that stood out to him during this battle, and that was Lagertha. Now, she is not without her own. She is also of noble birth, which really made her quite the prize for Ragnar. Now, one interesting thing I found about the story was that one way that Lagertha made sure that Ragnar really, really wanted her, she tested him. Supposedly, she put a bear and a dog on her front porch and said if he could get through them, he can have her. And he did. So, these two were soon married. They had 2 daughters and 1 son, Fridleif, I think is how you pronounce his name. Now, unfortunately, their marriage did not last very long. They only lasted about 3 years because at about the 3-year mark is when a lot of things were starting to be upsetted in Ragnar's territory in the Danish kingdom. So Ragnar set sail to go back to his kingdom, and this is where King Harald comes into play. Now, King Harald is the new king of Sweden. Now, Ragnar meets King Harald, and there is something that Harald has that Ragnar wants: his daughter, Thora. Now, Thora, the interesting thing about her that her father could not stand was that her little side hobby, if you will, was growing snakes. And the snakes had been growing completely out of control. So King Harald said, if you want my daughter's hand in marriage, you need to solve the snake problem for me, and I will give you my blessing to have my daughter. So Ragnar does just that, divorces Lagertha, and then he gets to marry Thora. And just like the TV show, Ragnar was not done with Lagertha because she had something that he wanted: an army. So there were times where Ragnar would still call upon Lagertha to help him in these battles. And of course, by this time she is remarried and she has an army of her own. And during one battle, she had actually supplied 120 ships filled with men. Now, after that great big battle, she actually goes home and unalives her husband and usurps him. It happens. And then she rules until the end of her days. Now, this book itself, there's actually several different volumes in this entire story that was written. So there were 16 volumes in this entire thing, but Lagertha was only mentioned up until volume 10. Now, what the author did was the first 10 books was fiction, and the next books after that, the next 6 ones, were actually nonfiction. They were more history behind the Danish kingdom. It was family trees, things like that. So basically from volume 1 to 10 is just stories. So from 1185 on is from volume 11 all the way to 16. Now, it is believed that Lagertha is based off of the Norse god Thorgerd. She was a Valkyrie. So that is a woman that is sent down by the god Odin to help Vikings in battle. Now, it's been speculated for so many years that shield maidens did or did not exist. However, there really is no historical evidence yet that backs up that women did go into battle. But it's also very plausible that they did, because the Norse people were very much wanted to be like their gods. And since there is a Valkyrie, it's not too far of a stretch for women to go into battle with men during this time either. So I would like to believe that maybe there is some truth behind Lagertha. I hope that she was a real person because she's kind of a badass. I would like to believe that both of these women were real people. There's just no historical evidence to back either one of them up, but doesn't mean that they weren't written out of history, that there isn't some truth to their stories. So definitely comment below what you think of these two women. If you have any evidence or if you have anything to add to it, I would gladly appreciate that. And if you have any further book recommendations about whether these two women or about this time, definitely comment those down below as well. And if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more book recommendations and just book talk in general.